during this COVID thing, when we were all cowering in our homes because the government told us to, and we were, under this fear porn that the media was giving us, we felt helpless. We don't have to feel that way. And we're part of a bigger community, and we're actually the majority. And we only need about 15% of Canadians to stand up when we get our institutions back. We're at one of those interesting places at history where we're a generation that doesn't have a choice. Like, we can't sit by and let it happen. We know that sooner or later we're going to have to stand up. I think it's why so many people feel uneasy, because they're afraid of the cost, in really short terms, and it's why you're here and interested, is we're going to lose our natural health products. And when I say that, I mean, we're always going to have, shelves full of vitamins. I shouldn't say that, because they don't even want that. Any products that are actually meaningful and can be used for meaningful purposes are going to be gone. Like, you'll realize if you're a natural health practitioner, you're done for. Like, I don't think you even have 2 years. I think that's generous. And if you don't understand it, you're really not going to be empowered. And even, the Canadian Health Food Association, which is the facilitator. So they're the group. This is what's called a rent-seeking exercise, is what economists call it. Where basically regulations get stricter and stricter and stricter, to the point that only the large players can survive. So it creates a quasi-monopoly. And the large players love it, because even though the regulatory burden is quite expensive and onerous, it drives their competition out of business. So they do much better economically than if we didn't have rent seeking. And the regulatory body loves it, because they collect all these fees from the industry, and then they get to grow their bureaucracies. So one of the initiatives that Health Canada is bringing in is to say, hey, well, we're charging the chemical drug companies these fees. So, just to be able to manufacture, you have to have a site license. To be able to distribute, to import, there's all these really actually quite strikingly high fees, and to apply for a product license, and then yearly for the right to sell a product. Well, Health Canada wants to impose these on the natural health product community. And they're right in our face saying, and we're going to create this whole army of inspectors to then enforce much stricter regulations on the industry, which is then will drive more and more and more manufacturers out of business. It's super important for you to understand that this has nothing to do with health. It has nothing to do with risk. This is about harmonizing our international drug regulations with other countries. We haven't been this deep ever before. So Canada is involved in joining. It's an international treaty, although the title would be misleading, and you wouldn't understand that it's a binding treaty. And then they're also redoing the international health regulations and doing some very interesting things. So there were in there before, there was text about human rights over, self-determination, and basically our right to have sovereignty over our own bodies. Well, that's being taken out. So we're going to have binding health regulations, international health regulations, where we actually don't have any rights over our own bodies. But the natural health product community is huge, and it involves a large segment of the Canadian population that knows nothing about what's going on in our world. In 2008, I was being escorted out of the Prime Minister's office in Ottawa after a meeting by Laurie Thronis, who was number 2 politically at the Ministry of Health at the time. He later went on to be an MLA in British Columbia, for those of you out in BC. Peter Helgeson was with me, and he asked Laurie, he said, Laurie, have you seen Shawn's discussion paper on Bill C-51? And he literally got mad. And he got mad because, as he explained, the mail was coming in wheelbarrows to the Minister of Health's office, because everyone was printing out the discussion paper and then writing an angry letter and stapling the two together and sending them in. And we had MPs tell us that it was the only issue where their office was shut down, where literally they couldn't do any work because everyone was trying to interact with them, all their constituents, over this issue. Now, why I'm telling you this and why this is so important is us losing our natural health products is the least of our worries right now. Us waking up the Canadian population to the wider issues of what's going on, and us actually getting the MPs to understand they're not going to get elected We can do that over this issue. We actually have an opportunity to wake up a sleeping segment of Canadian population who is concerned and will be concerned about losing their access to natural health products. If we can all organize properly and have all the practitioners educating their patients, that in itself would create an army. You've learned what it's like to be afraid. You've learned what it's like to be, totally blown over by learning that the world is a different place. But what you haven't learned yet is what it's like to stand up and be willing to lose things, to actually pay a price. Reader's Digest is we're going to lose access to a lot of products, and people are going to die, and people are going to be hurt over this. Whenever the government or anyone else tells you you are in danger, you're in risk, to actually compare that risk to other risks in your life. Would you give up any of your freedoms to be protected from lightning, right? Because lightning's a risk. I actually know somebody that was struck by lightning and killed. Lightning's a risk. Do you know you are 14 times more likely to be struck by lightning than to be killed by a natural health product? And yet Health Canada and the government of Canada is telling us that we need to be protected from natural health products. So we need to lose the right to access them to protect us from them. For those of you who aren't familiar with True Hope, it's a company that developed a product to treat bipolar disorder, severe bipolar disorder. It just so happens that it can be tremendously effective for that. When they were, starting out, basically the cohort of people that were taking their product was that group of people with such severe bipolar disorder that they would be spending, a third to a half of each year involuntarily committed into psych wards. And that cohort of people in that group, they're lucky to live 5 years once they hit that group. That was the group that was on this product. And there were thousands and thousands of them. And Health Canada restricted it. It's manufactured in the US, and they stopped it at the border. And there was suicide and suicide and suicide and suicide. And it's literally saved thousands and thousands of lives, because if it works for you, you just become normal and you go back to work. And so I just cite that as an example, because there's Health Canada and the government of Canada will never take into account the risk of removing these products from the market. And cost recovery, I'll just emphasize, the fees are just so high that if you are a consumer, the prices have to go up. You can't impose this type of cost structure and this new extremely onerous regulatory structure on businesses without those that survive raising their prices to compensate for the new burden. Let's talk about censorship. I mean, for those of you who haven't been touched by Health Canada yet on censorship issues, and I mean, they've been having great luck because the naturopathic colleges in the provinces have now become just basically provincial enforcement arms of Health Canada against naturopathic doctors. And on this censorship issue, where they're just all falling in line like little lapdogs. But Health Canada takes the position that the only thing you can say about an approved drug is the label claim. So using True Hope E-Empower Plus as an example, the label claim is supports mental health and well-being. So Health Canada would take the position the only thing True Hope can legally say is supports mental health and well-being. Can't say anything else. Nothing. I think there's probably like about 35 studies in peer-reviewed journals. It's illegal for them to share that, right? Like they're going after naturopathic doctors for saying anything about IV treatments in their practices. With this self-care framework, they're going to use this cost recovery to create a whole enforcement arm to go after you for making claims. So back in 2008, Bill C-51, Health Canada was proposing this dramatic increase in powers that we fought against, and Health Canada backed down. But they're kind of like the Chinese. They think in like 100-year increments. So they know what the goal is, and they'll just be patient. So with Vanessa's law, which was really just using Vanessa's story to get those powers that they'd already tried before. They weren't drafted for Vanessa's law. Pretty well word from word, they came out of Bill C-51. But they only applied to chemical drugs. And now the proposal is, well, let's change the law so that they apply to natural health products. And this law has already been introduced in Parliament. It's part of the budget bill, sections 500 to 504 of Bill C-47, the act to implement the federal budget. It's passed second reading and in committee. And if it passes, these brave new powers will apply to you and be used to totally annihilate you if you step out on making truthful health information available. So right now, if you step out of line on a natural health product, you are facing a $5,000 fine per offense. But we're moving from a $5,000 per offense, and an offense could last a week, it could last a month, it could last year. Let's say you're selling a product without a license for a year, that can be one offense. But under these new powers, the penalty will jump from $5,000 to $5 million per day. Under these new changes, any director, officer, or employee is personally liable to a $5 million a day fine. The regulations for all over-the-counter drugs, so the chemical and natural, will be regulated identically. But this category of drugs cannot be for any condition for which you would seek the advice of a healthcare practitioner licensed by a province. So if it's a condition serious enough that you might go to a naturopathic doctor, a TCM, a nutritionist, oh, no, you go under the new drug licensing scheme with the average cost of $1 billion. We will not be able to use traditional use evidence to support an efficacy claim. To get a license, to get Health Canada's permission to sell, you have to show it's safe, but you also have to show it works for the purpose for which you want to sell it. And we've been able to use traditional use evidence. You can't sit still. You can't ride this one out if you're a practitioner. You're done. But we need you to go to the NHPPA site and you subscribe, give us your email. There's a way you can subscribe to our alerts. We need you to fund us, and we need you to give us a monthly commitment so that we can confidently hire people to work this file. Did I say that your practice is done? I think I said that. Your job is no longer to practice. Your job is to resist this tyranny. We're the last freedom group standing on the NHPPA front. And it's funny, the Canadian Health Food Association, which don't get me going because, my mother said, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it. They don't even have the institutional memory of the Standing Committee of Health and the 53 recommendations in Bill C-51. And they're running this initiative right now, which is wrong at law and missing the big problems. Really honored that you're participating in this call. And I'm just making it clear, we truly need your support.